So, in talking about politics, is you do get a sense for how politics can be very emotional, drive people, uh, and in good and bad. And so you have in Judea Jews who are being occupied by the Roman government, who is not a pro-Jew kind of a government. I mean, they simply allow the Jews to practice their religion as long as they don't cause any trouble. And the fact that they're occupying the Jewish territory of Judea uh, comes with some problems. They collect taxes on the people of which they occupy a country. Uh, the Jews don't like that. They already pay taxes uh, to the Jewish government. King Herod, for example, would be a person who would impose taxes they'd have to pay to. But now an additional tax by the Roman government is just something people don't appreciate. And so the anger that stirs up is very similar to what we see just in our current political climate, that people get angry. So the zealots, we talked about Judas being a possible member of the zealots. The zealots are the people who are politically minded to the point of uh, Antifa type things, destruction. They would attack Roman soldiers and destroy their supplies. They were actively involved in creating chaos for the Roman government, and for that they paid a severe price. So when they were caught, they were put down pretty quickly. Uh, but Jesus has at least one zealot in his group of 12, and possibly a second one with Judas, if we understood that study a little bit. But just remember that angst is always there among the Jewish people, okay? And that hatred for Rome is always there, okay? They want to be a free people. We think about the Jews who were in who were slaves in Egypt, and that idea to one day not have to be a slave. That's always that was sort of the Jewish dream. When Moses leads them out of Egypt, that's I mean, what a special time that is, okay? And God preserves them. But the Jews want to get back to that, being an independent nation where they basically make their own decisions. This aspect of freedom is real important to them. So, but it's not there right now. So they're living in this deal that the person who occupies the Roman throne is they're in subject to him. So we enter into the character of Zacchaeus, who is a tax collector who actually works for the Roman government. So if you're a Jew, to become a tax collector, it's really a pretty good paying job because they actually put bids out for the tax collector. I mean, if you wanted to be the tax collector, you had to bid on that job. And if you put enough money out front, then Romans go, okay, you qualify because you spent enough to be able to buy the position. So Zacchaeus is probably there because he bought the position. And once you have the position, it comes with an enormous amount of wealth that you get created for yourself. But it also comes with a lot of enemies that you have. And Zacchaeus, even though he's a Jew, is despised heavily by the other Jews in the community. He lives within the Jewish community, but he's despised by them. They don't let him go to temple. They don't. They restrict things that he can do. I talked about before that he can't do a testimony in a court. He's sort of a non-person, but he's very visible, and the wealth that he gets has to do with the fact that he can tax just about anybody or anything that he comes across. He lives in Jericho. Jericho is a real trading type of city. A lot of people would come to Jericho to trade their goods. And then, of course, he's able to tax them as soon as they come into the city. And then once they make their sales, he can tax them on the way out of the city. So that particular thing comes with it's not like there's a chart that how much tax you can create. So that gives the tax collector a lot of advantage to be able to tax a little higher. And the little higher amount that they tax, they get to keep. Zacchaeus is probably not the day-to-day tax guy, but probably has a group of people who work for him who collect taxes and they bring them to him. But he's known as the head tax guy. Uh, so we have the story of Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19. And 19:1 says, and he entered, he being Jesus entered and was passing through Jericho, which we just noticed, had my maps on last time, north and east of Jerusalem, fairly close is Jericho. It is, I don't know, it's an interesting little town. I found another tidbit of information is that it has a bunch of trees that are planted in Jericho. In fact, let me switch over. I'm sorry, I got my notes on my screen. So let me go to.
This is the same Jericho that we have the walls that fall and Rahab and all of that crowd.
Yep, same one. So let me go to, there we go. Okay, so here we go. Jericho and.
I gotta go, I forgot something. Be back.
Okay. So we mentioned he's pretty much despised. And I talked about last time too, just small tidbit while Mary Alice is going, they're able to tax people from age 14 if you're a male or age 12 if you were female. So any little children wouldn't be taxed. But if you were older than that, you're subject to get approached to be taxed. And what happened is that the tax collectors got very creative. So they would not only tax goods that you had, they started taxing, like if you had a cart and it had 2 axles on it, they would tax that. How many wheels are on the cart? They would tax that. So they just started inventing things up, and that made them even more despised by the people who are having to pay the tax. So you're a Jew, but you're not considered a Jew by anyone else, not by anyone in Judea. This town I was mentioning, Jericho, has, where's my Jericho note? Yeah, anyway, it has some kind of it's noted for these trees that are in Jericho, a very fragrant type of a tree. So they said it was a town that when you walked in, it was like Febreze, you had this light odor, but very pleasant odor from these trees in the city. So a lot of people like to live there.
Even though Zacchaeus was despised, he was still pretty rich. So he probably had some people that hung out with him.
We'll have that discussion. Hang on to that thought because I'm going to ask that question in just a little bit. But the tree, I was hoping to get Mary Alice's to identify the tree, what it was. And I can't seem to find my note. But anyways, very fragrant tree that puts on maybe not a eucalyptus, but it'd be some type of a tree that had a real nice odor about it. That's a small point.
You showed us the tree last time.
Well, I showed you a sycamore tree, an example of what a sycamore tree looked like. And that particular tree had its base fairly low to the ground. Generally, when you see the stories of Zacchaeus, I looked up a couple of kids' stories, and it's usually this really big fat tree and there's just no way a little guy can climb up a tree with a big.
Well, the scripture calls it a sycamore fig tree in my Bible. So
well, yeah. So, but probably a lower base tree. There's Jay. Let's slip Jay in. Hold on. Hey. Hello, Jay. Welcome. Okay, so let me get not too far ahead. We got this tax guy, but watch how it develops. Okay, so it says it's in Jericho. That's all we get in verse 1. Verse 2 says, and behold, there was a man called by the name of Zacchaeus, and he was the chief tax gatherer, okay, which means the head guy, not the lower tax guy that probably does the day-to-day collecting. But then it adds that little phrase that Mary Alice just mentioned, but he was rich. And it's an unusual thing to use to describe someone. So as you read that introduction, when it says he was a tax collector and he was rich, is the author Luke? Is that a complimentary description? What's he doing when he adds that phrase, and he was rich? What do you think? What's Luke trying to tell us?
He was good at his job of cheating people.
Well, if that could be, he's trying to emphasize that his wealth coming from tax collecting, maybe it's that type of deal. So indirectly, that'd be a good response. Anybody else got a thought? Is he trying to be honoring to Zacchaeus? Oh, here's Zacchaeus. Yes, he was a tax collector. Oh, but he was also very wealthy. Is he trying to pay honor to him? Maybe.
I think he was trying to explain how he got his wealth too, huh?
Okay, yeah, that's probably right. He's saying, yeah, but he's rich because of his tax collecting.
Right.
Okay, so let's put that, maybe just give that a little thought. What kind of friends does Zacchaeus have? Well, we know he has no Jewish friends. We already know that. Who does Zacchaeus get to hang out with?
Other tax collectors.
Yeah, you hang out with the guys you work with, pretty much, who are also hated by the other Jews, okay? But I get the impression when we go through the story that Zacchaeus is not loaded with friends. He's probably loaded with associates, but not loaded with friends, all right? So think about that just as we go through here. He makes it in verse 2, he makes the comment that he was rich. 3 says, and he was trying to see who Jesus was and was unable to because of the crowd, for he was small in stature. And so just those two verses, 2 and 3, we get his job, we get he's rich, and we get another detail that he's small in stature. Now, generally the Bible doesn't describe people in the Gospels with a lot of detail about what they look like. We have no real clear description of what Jesus looked like. You know, but if he was small in stature, they may have said the Messiah, you know, the short guy. But they don't, there's no reference like that. But whenever we get a reference to somebody in Scripture, it usually tells you something about them. So we can think of people how they're described in the Gospels, and it's what? It's the leper, it's the blind man, it's the lame man. It always gives you some description about them and what their, and oftentimes what their malady is, okay? And I think that's what Luke does here. He says he's a tax collector, he's rich, and he's small. Okay. So,
Well, I think that tells us a lot because I've seen it anyway that sometimes short men are very bothered by their shortness.
Anti-roosters.
Insecure, Mary Alice, is the word you want.
Okay.
listen to y'all, anti-men. What's the anti-men phrase? Okay, so short, exactly how short do we talked about? What was the short limit?
Well, all the people were shorter back then than they are now.
But he seems to be short enough to be singled out among the group of
Right.
people that he's even shorter than them.
Well, usually short would also mean small too, like petite.
Yeah,
You
I don't think he's a midget. You know.
No, I didn't say midget.
But he wouldn't be burly and husky.
Right, like most men are.
Which makes me suspect that he's not the guy that encountered you with the give me your tax money.
He had his,
Head guy, okay, chief tax collector who hires people to do this. You see that? So some people say, well, is it like a Napoleon complex, that you're a small guy, but you feel like you really need to, I don't know, it's kind of psychoanalyzing, but there's probably something in the fact that Luke brings it out.
He
That
could be
his
the
short
brain.
stature has something, what was that?
He could be the brains of the operation if he's got guys under him.
Well, no question, I think he is. I think his description as chief tax collector means he's the top of the peak. So, but his size may has something to do with it. And maybe it is that if he's unusually shorter than everyone else, it's bad enough you don't have any friends because of your job, but then if you add another descriptive quality to you that you're also real short, that maybe that has some type of negative. But if it is, and we got to be careful, we can't psychoanalyze too much, but we're given some information that we're supposed to do something with. And so this description of the fact that he's short, I think is an important thing. But the shortness figures into the story, okay? It says, and he was trying, and then it says in verse 3, and he was trying to see Jesus, and was unable to because of the crowd. And for he was small in stature. Okay, so does anyone's verse say we? we
Hey, it worked for the song. Just cool it.
okay,
It worked for the
and
song.
works in the song. I mean, I almost have to sing this every time I start reading it. So I have to back off there in that song. So okay, so he's short in stature. And we talked about briefly, but again, just to kind of quick review, why does he want to see Jesus? I mean, that's an interesting question to ask. Well, you know, why would Zacchaeus have any interest in seeing Jesus? Well, let me ask another question before I get to that, before you answer. Who is traveling with Zacchaeus? Who is it that helps Zacchaeus up in the tree?
No one.
You get the impression that Zacchaeus is traveling by himself, okay? Or that he's by himself when this event occurs. So what would be the drawing feature for Zacchaeus to want to see Jesus?
Are you saying that he was traveling from somewhere out of town?
It just says Jesus is going through Jericho.
Oh, he was asking about Zacchaeus lived there.
Yeah, why does Zacchaeus want to see Jesus?
He's heard about him.
So,
It's like seeing a celebrity nowadays. A lot of people want to go see a celebrity.
okay, so think about this. You have very few friends yourself, and you're looking at a guy who you've obviously heard something about. He doesn't say, I wonder who this could be. He seems to know that it's Jesus, who is surrounded by a crowd of people who love and adore him. Why would Zacchaeus want to see that guy? And what came to my mind was that he wanted to see what is it about this guy that makes people want to be around him. Yeah. I don't think anyone wants to be around Zacchaeus. Okay. So what does that mean? It doesn't give us any clue. There's just nothing. It just says he wants to see him. All right. So let's see what this is. He looking for salvation? Is he looking for healing? Is he going to ask Jesus to put his hands on him, make him taller? Doesn't seem to have none of that seems to be in the picture. Okay. But, you know, maybe that would have been a good thing for Zacchaeus to go ahead, Jesus, help make me taller, you know. Right before this chapter, by the way, okay, Jesus encounters another guy who is a blind man who's on the road also. And a crowd surrounding Jesus, okay, and the blind man says, who is it? And they said, it's Jesus. And then he starts yelling, Jesus, Jesus. And they say, be quiet, you know. They try to silence him. But he's almost obnoxious in his desire to want to see Jesus. And Jesus calls him out, says, bring him over. And Jesus gives him sight, okay? So the story that follows right after that, this next chapter, is a person who's not blind. He's just not tall enough to see Jesus either. Okay. The blind man couldn't see Jesus. He yells out. This guy can't see Jesus either, but he gets up in a tree. And I don't think you need to be 20 feet up in a tree. Okay. That's what we were trying to point out last week, is that it's probably a low branch tree that he's able to get up just to be above the size of the crowd. Okay. And let's see. In verse 4 says, and he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree in order to see him. Okay, so again, we have nothing that says he's desiring something from Jesus. He doesn't want an autograph. He's not trying to high five him as he's going past him. He just wants to see him. But there's something about Jesus and the crowd that surrounds him that captures Zacchaeus' imagination in some way. Okay, so goes up in the sycamore tree. He was about to pass through that way, he being Jesus. And when Jesus came to the place, and that's interesting phrase, don't want to read it too quickly. When Jesus came to the place, he, Jesus, looked up to him.
What place?
Where the tree is, where Zacchaeus is at. But look at the phraseology. And it says, and Jesus did what? He looked up to him.
and talk to him.
And Zacchaeus is a person that people don't look up to, and they definitely don't talk up to, they talk down to. So it's an interesting positioning. That Zacchaeus, while he's not a tall person, he's elevated himself above Jesus, and Jesus looks up to him. And I think and this is my own thought here, but I can't say my own thought, I'm sure other people thought this also. But I think by looking up to him, that he does something that we oftentimes don't feel comfortable doing. He grants him some dignity, okay? Now, is Zacchaeus worthy of having anyone grant him dignity? No, he's a tax collector. He's a cheat, basically. But he grants him dignity. And again, I mentioned this before, and I've done it in some other studies we've done. There's something about Jesus's ability to see people not the way the crowd sees them, but to see them with some type of actual worth or value. Okay? Does that make sense? So he stops. Now, Jesus didn't say he was necessarily in town to see Zacchaeus. Okay? And had Zacchaeus not run up into the tree ahead of him, Jesus probably would have never encountered him. But he does, and he stops and he looks up. But how does Jesus know his name? Did you used to hang out on the weekends, have a couple of beers, you know? How does Jesus know
He's
Zacchaeus'
a
name?
chief tax collector. I would think that you would know him, perhaps.
Maybe he's run into him. Yet we don't get any sense of that when we hear the beginning of the story. It just says Zacchaeus wants to see him. Not to collect tax from him, by the way. Okay. Doesn't seem
You
like
asked why Jesus would know his name.
Yeah, why does Jesus know his name?
Well, Jesus would have been taxed at Nazareth where he was living, unless they asked for taxes for somebody traveling through the town.
Yeah, but it doesn't give us any clue that there's any
Right.
pre-knowledge of each other before.
Right.
It doesn't say, and again, he ran across Zacchaeus. It doesn't say anything like that. And Zacchaeus's desire to see Jesus doesn't seem to be anything more than just glimpsing someone who's very popular. Doesn't seem to come with anything else. And it could be that Jesus may have stopped and said, who's the guy in the tree? And someone says, oh, that's Zacchaeus. It could be something that simple, okay, though it doesn't record that. Or it could be that Jesus is given supernatural ability to know who Zacchaeus is. And I'm okay with that, if he is, all right? I'm okay with that. So he looks up to him, he says, unable to see the crowd, he was small in stature, okay. And he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, and again, when you're using the name, you're creating more your personal identity. You're personalizing the statements, okay? When you talk to someone, if you use their name, that's better than, hey, you. I call CJ and I go, hey, you guy, you know. But you know, if I can say Jay, you know, and he recognizes that as his name, then it's more personal. So people like hearing their name, by the way, in case you didn't know that. And he says, he looked up, he said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for today I must stay in your house. Sorry, I almost started singing. Okay, hurry, come down, for today I must stay in your house. And again, we've had a little of this, again, review a bit, but if you'll allow me. Jesus was just passing through Jericho, and his plans are now all changed. He sees Zacchaeus, who we get the impression he doesn't know anything about. But he does something that I think we recognize, is he gives attention to someone that no one in that crowd would have ever given any attention to. Okay? And he calls him by name, and he says, I want to stay in your house. Do you remember how many times in the Bible we see people angry that Jesus or an apostle or a disciple is in the house of someone who's not worthy in their eyes? Remember Peter when he's in the house of Simon the tanner, right? Not a good profession if you're a Jew, tanning. Okay, all right. When he's in the house of a Gentile, when he's in the presence of a Gentile, when Jesus is hanging out or meeting with another another tax collector or sinner, that's it. Just to me, I just found that really interesting that he has no problem of not wanting to meet with them. Nobody in that crowd would have ever gone to Zacchaeus' house. And we don't get any indication that somehow everybody rushed over to Zacchaeus' house because Jesus was going there. We don't see that at all. But he says, I must stay in your house today. And the idea is that Jesus knows something is going to happen. Jesus is aware of that. Zacchaeus doesn't know anything that's going to happen. But Jesus goes, I must stay at your house today. But think of all the rules that have been violated. Zacchaeus, who probably doesn't have a lot of friends, is now a friend of the guy who's been surrounded by a crowd of adoring people. Zacchaeus gets to be pulled out of the crowd and gets to associate with this guy who's now has lots of friends and lots of people who pour adoration on Jesus. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Since Jesus invited himself to Zacchaeus' house, does that mean his entourage was invited too and he had to feed all of that crowd?
I don't think feeding people is going to be a problem, but yeah, I think Jesus takes
I mean, and for it to be ready, somebody's got to fix it, you know.
Zacchaeus, this is not going to be a problem for a real wealthy person. If he needed to cut a calf to feed everybody, that's available.
Right, but I mean, just
this guy's got a big freezer. Okay. A lot of people can come by, and he's probably host a lot of other tax collectors, but there's no undue burden that we get from Zacchaeus that if he's indeed wealthy, then what kind of house does he have? A large house. He probably has servants. So he's not lacking. So if Jesus come with his entourage, this is not a big deal, I don't think, for Zacchaeus. Okay. And look at Zacchaeus' response. It wasn't like the woman at the well where he yells back, why do you want to come to my house? He doesn't do that. This is so shocking for Zacchaeus that he's being given some type of recognition of dignity that he's absolutely thrilled. Now, my verse says, he said he hurried down and received him gladly in verse 6. Anybody else got a different translation for gladly in verse 6?
Joyfully.
Joyfully. This is really interesting, guys. Zacchaeus' response is someone, again, I can't maybe explain it, but it's he's being recognized with an element of dignity by Jesus that no one has ever given him from the Jewish world. And he's ecstatic, he's glad, he's giddy. Okay. And verse 7 says, and when they saw it, they, the crowds, and they began to grumble. See, that's the normal reaction. And even though we talked about this before, this verse sort of just kept weighing on me. The crowd grumbles, saying, he has gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner.
when it
Heaven
says,
forbid any of them would be guilty of sin. Okay, what were we going to say?
I got a question. It says all the people. So does that include the disciples?
No. I mean, they may have, but the reaction seems to be more from the crowd.
Because it just says all the people. So that would be,
Again,
I was
this
just wondering if
wouldn't
that-
be the first time Jesus has eaten at the house of a tax collector.
well, he did it at Matthew's house.
Yeah, but he's not the first time, because we see the accusations by the Pharisees, which we'll look at in a second,
Right.
that Jesus is someone who eats with publicans and sinners.
Right.
So the disciples have been in this situation before. Just for example, the idea of being with Samaritans, that there's several encounters that he has with Samaritans, with the disciples. So to them, they would just as soon not go through Samaria, but Jesus takes them there through multiple times. Okay.
Right.
So good questions, though. It says, and he hurried down and came down and receives them gladly. 7, and when they saw it, they began to grumble, saying, he is gone to be a guest of the man who is a sinner. And I think I asked Brenda this last time. Brenda, what's wrong with that comment? What's wrong with that? I mean, or what's right with that comment? He's gone to be a guest. What's wrong with that?
I forget what I said last time.
I know, that's why I say we're reviewing here. So what's the point? But what would be that? Well,
Oh, we're all sinners.
yeah, but they're not including themselves. Okay. They're excluding themselves because they have the ability of what? Having grown up in Jewish community, Jewish society, learned the law, do all the temple stuff. They do all the sacrifices, they do all the stuff. Yet Zacchaeus doesn't do any of those because he's not welcome in the temple. Okay. And Jesus is now going to go spend time with the guy who's the worst of the Jews. Okay. It's bad enough to be a Jew, but to be a Jew who's a traitor to other Jews. Okay. That's pretty bad. And so that's a guy that the Jewish community gives no dignity to. Jesus has just extended dignity to him. And they're in an uproar. Okay. They're in an uproar. He's gone to spend time with sinner, the house of a sinner. But what would be wrong with it? Isn't that a good thing to do? And isn't that a good, well, I was asking Brenda, isn't that a good response? Isn't that the response we should have? Brenda goes and has dinner at the house of one of the local bootleggers in San Marcos. What should our reaction be?
Well, hasn't it always been the church, well, not just the church, but apparently now with the Jewish community, that you are supposed to avoid the people that could contaminate you?
Exactly. So Jesus is actually sinning because he's now going to eat with a person who's definitely contaminated because he deals with Gentiles. Okay. Are we comfortable with that? Are we comfortable with that? With putting Brenda to the side because she's gone to eat at the house of a bootlegger out on Lime Kiln Road? You see, when you change the context, it sort of looks like, yeah, that's pretty bad, because if she does that, then what? Like we talked about last week, slippery slope, you know. But somehow Jesus does this. And I guess here'd be the thing that I think I'd like to be better at, which I'm not, but I'd like to be better at, is being able to extend dignity to those that we would initially deny dignity to. You see? And then when I was thinking about that particular thing, okay, I moved over to another area, which was Mark chapter 12:31. I'll just read it. He talks about the two great commandments. The second, he said, is love your neighbor. Okay, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, follow me through this transition. Love your neighbor. That's only if you live in a Christian community, right? So if you lived in a gated Christian community where everyone else is Christians, then loving your neighbor, that's what we're talking about, right? No, because we see the same situation when Luke chapter 10, when the lawyer talking to Jesus says, well, who is my neighbor? Okay. And it's not Mr. Rogers. He says, who is my neighbor? So the idea when Jesus says, love your neighbor, and then responds to, well, who's my neighbor? And then Jesus gives a story of what? The religious Jewish man. No. He gives the story of the Good Samaritan, which again, that makes no sense. That's like the good tax collector. What did he just say? The good tax collector. Because when a Jew heard the Good Samaritan, that's an oxymoron. Those are opposite things. Okay. You can't be good and a Samaritan. Yet that's the answer Jesus gives to the lawyer when he says, who's my neighbor? This becomes very problematic. Okay. I've been trying to work through this. Okay. Then in Matthew chapter 5, it says, love your enemies. Okay. You've heard that, right, Les? Love your enemies?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Now, my response to that I put in my notes was, for how long? How many days are we supposed to love our enemy? I meet Brenda, she's my enemy. I go, Brenda, I love you, Brenda. But tomorrow I'm going to hate your guts. Okay? Is that, how long are you supposed to love your enemy? Give me a timeline, Mary Alice.
Uh,
How long should we love our enemies?
well, according to God's timeline, forever.
Yeah, but we have to live with that statement, so we have to adjust it to our timeline. So how long should that be that we should love our enemies? Until we see them again?
Until they change, right?
Yeah, love them until they change. Then we can, right? But see, if they change, they wouldn't be your enemy. Think about
No,
that.
but I mean, if you
If
don't
they
want
change.
to love them, then you got a reason.
You don't want to love your enemy. There's no natural thing that makes you want to love your enemy. That's what Jesus tells us to do. Okay? And then I thought, how many days you're supposed to love your enemy? Give me a second. I wrote this down. Hold on. Yeah. Are you supposed to love well, if you're only nice to people who are nice to you, is that anything unique? Is there anything unique about that?
Oh.
You're only nice to people nice to you? No. You see, even the bad people are nice to each other. Okay. So that's not an outstanding quality to only be nice to people who are nice to you. So this created a real problem for me. Okay. Loving your enemy and loving your neighbor. It's easy to love your neighbor if they're a nice person, right, Jay?
Yes.
Yeah, easy to nice them when they're nice. But what if your neighbor's not nice, Jay?
It's really difficult to do that.
It's really hard.
Almost impossible.
It feels impossible. But how about this? How about if your neighbor, who's your enemy, starts stoning you with rocks? Can the love stop then? Can we stop then? Boom, he gets pelted by a big rock. Now you can stop loving them.
You stop loving them because you're dead.
You're on your way to death, but you're not there yet, Brenda. You're just being bloodied and bludgeoned. You're not there yet. Does the love get to stop?
Oh,
How about a love that says, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do? Man alive. That can't be for us though, right? That's just Jesus' words on the cross, right? Well, it was Jesus' words on the cross. It's also the words of Stephen when he's being stoned.
mm-hmm.
How do you do that? How do you forgive those who are your enemies, neighbors who are in the process of killing you? How do you do that? Father, forgive them. I don't know.
Well, God's Spirit, but it has to be the only way. Because our way of doing things wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Which makes me wonder if I have God's Spirit at all. Okay. Because my
I've
initial
wondered that myself, Rich. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you. And that concludes our study tonight.
No.
But you said, I thought about it. I go, gee, that's not.
Oh, I meant I've thought that myself about myself, not about you. But yeah, it's like
Thank you, Brenda, for that correction. Okay.
we're supposed to have this power. Why is it not coming out? Right? Why doesn't it help me more? And I found that I wasn't reading the Bible enough. The more I read the Bible, the more it helps me. At least
Well, this is problematic. What if your neighbor is a Democrat or a Republican and you're on the other side? How in the world are you supposed to love them? Again, I'm using that as a context, but now throw that real quickly to the Jewish world and a tax collector. You see that? That's just not a natural thing to do. The natural thing is to hate them. They stand against everything you stand for. It's the natural tendency is to be that way. All right, so if we're supposed to love our neighbors ourselves, and what was the time frame, Brenda? How long do we have to do that? For like a week, and then we can get back to it?
I would say the Bible would say 7 times 77 or whatever that word is, 77 times 7.
That's
A long time.
That's a lot of days, Brenda.
Oh no, a long time. I'm sorry.
We need something that's shorter, because we need to reinstate our hatred for these people quickly so that we can feel good about who we are. Okay?
Call
It's
from,
hard to, it's hard to feel good about who we are when someone is across from us that we hate or despise or think we do. And if Brenda shows kindness to someone who's her neighbor, who I hate and despise, then I have to hate and despise Brenda because she's showing kindness. When Jesus shows kindness to Zacchaeus, you see what happens instantly to the crowd? Then he is like Zacchaeus. They pull their kindness from him. Do you follow that? They pull their kindness.
Well,
Jesus, who they were adoring, now is like, oh, he's eating at the house of a sinner.
I think they more say that it's not fair that Zacchaeus is getting the good attention from Jesus. Why am I not getting it? Why is he worthy?
Well, that's a great observation. And the answer is he's not worthy. That's what their problem is. They know that Zacchaeus is not worthy. They have been brought up in Jewish culture and society that tells them that the tax collector is not a worthy person.
Well, that's
It's not
why
like
they're
just two of them. The
Yeah.
whole crowd's in agreement. This is understood. Those kind of people are not worthy. So who are those kind of people in your world? Who are those kind of people? You don't have to say, but I'm just saying, who are those kind of people? And I found that a little problematic. Because once I identify who those kind of people are, did he really mean I need to love them for more than a day? How do you love what is involved? How do you love someone who is an enemy? And an enemy could be somebody you dislike or whatever. They're not thinking like you, they're not same political spectrum as you, whatever. How do you love someone? And I think what we do is we look at what Jesus is doing here with Zacchaeus, is you have to show them dignity. Now here's the weird part. When we start showing them dignity, are we now saying, I now believe everything that you do, that everything that you do is good? Because Jesus is now pronouncing excessive taxing is now good because now I'm showing you dignity. Yeah, Mike, Mary Alice.
He's not granting him absolution.
Well,
He's not, no, but by going there, he's not saying everything that Zacchaeus does is okay.
yeah, that's the part that we have to do. But does he take time to say, look, Zacchaeus, I'm here at your house, okay, and I'm showing you dignity, but I want you to know, all right?
No, he
Not
doesn't.
everything, does he start laying into him now to start straightening Zacchaeus out so that he didn't have to be there too long showing dignity to someone without clarifying what his position is and what dignity really means? Did y'all follow that? Okay.
He doesn't try to change him.
Can you show dignity to someone without trying to change them? And if you don't try to change them, aren't you simply participating in their indignity that you've been trying to not give them?
That's called enabling.
Enabling.
Yeah.
So Jesus, you're saying, is enabling Zacchaeus. That's what we're seeing.
In this world, the example that you're giving us, yeah, what you're trying to ask.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. But I guess you could say that about Jesus. I don't know. I'm sure the crowd's saying that almost because they're in unanimity to the fact that this is not a good thing to do. So here's something to get a challenge with you. When you come across those who are who are your enemies, those who are your neighbors who don't see the world the same way you do, I believe the way you love them is the way Jesus is loving Zacchaeus, is you give them dignity. You recognize dignity. It's not that you're buying their whole worldview, but you've been commanded to love your neighbor. Okay. I find this very hard. Okay. This isn't like my natural inclination. Okay. But I'm finding out, because my challenge is like we talked about a few weeks ago, it feels like I'm on a slippery slope that if I give too much dignity, I'm conceding to them. You give the Nicodemus too much dignity, you are a co-tax collector, enemy of the Jewish people. The whole crowd sees it just like that. They don't even have to think about it. There's no groups Bible study. They all are in agreement that that's what Jesus is doing.
I think when you show other people dignity, like you're talking about, what it does is it lowers all the barriers between you.
Yeah, but think
It
of the
allows,
Go ahead.
yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, in the few times that I've done it to people that I know, it softens each other. It's like, whatever there is that's between you, it gets tossed out because it's almost like you're looking the person in the eye and seeing more than just judge the book by its cover. You're seeing into them.
Yeah, but when you've read enough books and you're in the book business, Brenda, do you have to read the whole book to know the cover? The cover.
I don't read the books I buy. I sell them, like the tax collector.
Right. Okay. But it's just a thought to consider, guys. So who are the person who's the homeless person camped out under the bridge? That my natural inclination is not to show dignity. I don't know. Just not my natural inclination is to talk about all the reasons why living on the bridge isn't a good thing. Why don't you get a job? And that's where I kind of want to go. Okay. And yet I don't ever see Jesus going there with these people. So think about that. So now he's in the home, but watch what happens when Jesus extends dignity to Zacchaeus by calling him by name, by insisting presence in his home. Okay. Look what happens. Zacchaeus hurries. He says, hurry and come down, must stay in your house. Verse 6, and he hurried down and received him gladly. And when he saw it, they all began to grumble, the Jews, and he has gone to be a guest of a man who is a sinner, which gives you the impression, right, that they're not following Jesus to Zacchaeus' house, right? Look at them, there they go. They stopped being around a crowd, and now they're just a mob pointing to Jesus, going with Zacchaeus. Okay, and Zacchaeus stopped, and it doesn't say, now, it could be he stopped on the way to the house, it doesn't say. Okay, it doesn't say if they're in the house, then he stopped what he was doing. It's not real clear. But it says Zacchaeus stops what he's doing, okay, and says to the Lord, now, he says, behold, half of all my possessions I will give to the poor. What's missing in this verse? Should hit you right away.
It's more than 10%.
It's more than 10%. Okay. If we were talking about tithing, you'd be correct. But we're not talking about tithing. Okay. What else is missing? What's happened? First of all, has there been some kind of change in Zacchaeus?
Right, but
change occurred?
he hasn't done the sinner's prayer.
That's right, Mary Alice. Thank you very much. He has not prayed the sinner's prayer. This is not a real conversion. Okay. Where's the born again? Where's the living water stuff? He hasn't done any of that. Has he even been baptized? No. He's violated everything that we have put up as the standard of what makes a person a believer. How dare Jesus? How dare Luke leave all that out? Now think about that, guy. Zacchaeus is so overwhelmed by the dignity that Jesus shows him that on the way in, maybe Jesus is talking about God. Maybe there's some discussion. We don't know exactly what, but the response to Jesus is, and I think what Luke does is he talks to him about the thing that's important about the encounter. Okay. He talks about the things that are important.
The change that comes over
And then
Zacchaeus.
the change that comes over as a result of that. And so the change is, Brenda wants to make tithing an issue here. You're allowed to give money to the poor. That is an Old Testament principle. But he says, half of my possessions I'm going to give to the poor. Okay, let's be a little critical here of Zacchaeus. Jay, help me out. Let's criticize Zacchaeus here on that statement he just said.
He's only given half.
Only half? Only half? How about 3/4?
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
Good. See, Jay knows how to think like a Jew. He's already figured that out quickly. Okay, only half. And then what's this? He says, I will give to the poor. And wait a minute. Do you think that half of Zacchaeus' wealth is going to eliminate poverty in Judea? Has he now eliminated the Judean poverty? No, no possible. No. He doesn't have enough money to eliminate poverty. So he said, well, then how about 1/4? I'll only give 25% then. Since I can't have a real big impact, I'll just cut it back to 25. He doesn't do that. He says, I'll give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'll give it back 4 times. I'm going to suspect if you're going to go bankrupt, that's the one that takes you there. Okay. But before he goes there, he gives half to the poor. Okay. Now there's an interesting story that precedes this story in the chapter right before this. What might you guess that might be about? It's the story in Luke chapter 18, verse 18, about the rich young ruler. So flip over if you got a Bible, Luke 18:18. And a certain ruler questioned him, Jesus, saying, good teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? This is interesting. Discussion here is about eternal life. And Jesus says to him, well, why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. And you know the commandments. Do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not bear false witness, honor your father and mother. 21. And he said, all these things I have kept from my youth. That's a pretty good guy. This is not the guy that the crowd would have said, Jesus is hanging out with the rich young ruler. Okay. No, they would love to hang out with this guy. He said, I've done all that. I've lived a pretty good life. And all these things I have kept from my youth. In 22. And when Jesus heard this, he said to him, one thing you still lack. Sell all your possessions and distribute it to the poor. And you shall have treasures in heaven. And come follow me. Wait a minute. Did Jesus tell Zacchaeus, because he was rich, that he needed to sell all his possessions? Did Jesus require Zacchaeus that he had managed to keep all of the 10 commandments as a prerequisite? Remember, Zacchaeus can't even get to the temple. And so he tells this guy, this rich young ruler, it says 31, but when he heard these things, he became very sad, for he was extremely rich. And Jesus looked at him and said, how hard it is for those who are wealthy to enter the kingdom of God. For it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. And we talked about that once before, but just bring it out as a small side cap. There are some that understand this phrase as being one of the entries into the city of Jerusalem, that there's a gate that's a small, narrow gate that has a smaller, it's not one of the big arching gates. That's called the eye of the needle because it's smaller. And people who are camels, okay, the camels have to get on all fours and drop down their load to get through the eye of the needle. It's a difficult thing to do. So he's not talking about an impossibility, but the idea that if indeed he's making reference to this story of that entrance into Jerusalem, of the difficulty that it is. Does Zacchaeus have the same problem that this guy does in the previous chapter? They're both rich. Zacchaeus, instead, he's not being asked to give away anything. You get the impression from the reading that Zacchaeus is volunteering all of this. It's coming from him voluntarily, not out of some prerequisite. And yet to the rich young ruler in the previous chapter, I think Jesus points out the fact that he really isn't. Okay? He really isn't sold out to God, that he really isn't obeying all the 10 commandments, okay? That he holds on to this one thing that doesn't allow him to follow Jesus. Zacchaeus has no problem. He volunteers to Jesus what he's going to do with this money. Now, let's see, hold on, because we're almost out of time. I'll give for it, and if I've defrauded anyone, well, again, the whole nature of being a tax collector is you're rich because you have defrauded people. That's the whole idea. How does he go out and track this down? I have no idea how that practically even plays out. I'll give it. And Jesus says in 9, and Jesus says to him, today salvation has come to this house because he too, he being what, Zacchaeus, is the son of Abraham. That's not possible that he's the son of Abraham. How does he become a son of Abraham? He can't even get into the temple. Okay. How can Zacchaeus be a son of Abraham? Because he's an heir according to the promise. He's an heir according to the promise. Promise made to Abraham. Okay. And Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. That Zacchaeus' righteousness isn't coming from any work that he's doing, but his ability to give away his wealth to the poor and to people he's defrauded is a sign of him being a changed person. It's not the prerequisite to become a changed person. Okay. But his identification as being a child, son of Abraham, how would that sound to you if you were Zacchaeus and you had spent the good part of your working adult life as a tax collector being denied the dignity that you're even Jewish? Okay. How does that sound to you? Go, Brenda, and you are you're also a child of Abraham. Just like soothing, lotion or something,
I think of the Sneetches, and it would feel like I have now a star upon me.
Yeah, you got a stars on theirs. That's really, really good. Okay, verse 10, for the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which is lost. How does Jesus seek that which is lost if he doesn't ever associate with the lost? How do you associate with the lost if you can't extend a dignity to them to have a conversation? Think about that. How do you? And that's the thing you see Jesus always doing, extending that dignity so he can have a conversation, and he goes and he does accomplish the very thing he says. He seeks, he has come to seek and to save those that are lost. That's how you do it. That's a challenge that's put out to us. But I tell you what, if you don't think about it regularly, you fall back into the crowd mentality of the people of Jericho. You fall back into that mentality. It's just where we go naturally. If we're not reminding ourselves, it's just where we go naturally. Okay. Think about it if you come across someone you find indignant this week. Okay, someone you find. Do we have the ability, okay, to extend dignity? Okay. All men are created in the image of God. Okay. They don't have to be a believer in God for you to be able to extend dignity. Okay. And Jesus seems to continually redefine for us, which he does, who our neighbor is. What's our
Gracious and not.
Okay, I'm going to disconnect and come right back on. Hang on, I'll be right back.